But I want to do a book on the hidden history of America. And the idea came to me when I heard a story. It was in 1864, a young man fell on a railroad tracks outside of New York. He was going to the city, I think from New Jersey or from Philadelphia. And another man rushed over and picked him up, and it was just this sort of spontaneous, coincidental meeting. The young man was Robert Todd Lincoln, who fell on the tracks. The man who helped him up was Edwin Booth, the brother of John Wilkes. This was a year before the assassination. And it got me thinking of that. We're trying to find, and both men wrote about this. It's not an apocryphal story. We know that this is true. We're trying to find exactly where it happened. But I love the idea that this is still an active train platform, of all these commuters every morning coming in here, not realizing that a year before President Lincoln was assassinated, the son of the president and the brother of the assassin had this sort of serendipitous meeting. And I know for a fact there are sites like these all across America. And I ask people through the warletters.com site, you can reach me, if they know of their own favorite little history site, because there's no plaque or marker, no identification of some of these places. But I want to infuse people with a love for their community and to realize that history is all around us. And it's a way to really connect with our homes, our neighborhoods, our other people, and to focus on how much we have in common as a country, not how separate we are, and really, I think, fostering a love for this great nation.
I do want to take this moment, and they just put up on the screen. I know many people want to contact you, and it's so great to know that they can at www.warletters.com, and you'll get some more information that I know that you'll be very interested in. I also want to ask the question about the Legacy Project. These books are remarkable, and as I introduced the program, you're on the New York Times bestsellers with all of them. But tell the viewers more about, now that in publishing these, apparently that is over, and you're going to do some other publishing, but what is your dream for the Legacy Project? Now that you have these 80,000 letters, and how will that be preserved, and will that be accessible to the public?
They are. In fact, we have some on the website. We have a little link on some of the letters that are already being exhibited through different means, and so those are accessible. My dream is to see the vast majority of these letters, because we need the permission of the families or the veterans or so forth, to make them accessible on the web so people across not just the country, but around the world can read these. And, really, 80,000 is a lot of letters. But when you think about it, during World War II alone, there were literally tens of billions of letters being written. You had 16 million people serving, all, of course, their family and friends on the home front, and they're exchanging, hundreds of thousands of letters apiece. And so there's still so many letters tucked away in attics and basements and closets around there, and a lot of people haven't heard about the project, which is understandable, but I'm hoping that when they do, they'll be like, we might have something that we should send in a photocopy. And even if people don't want to share them, just the awareness that they may have some extraordinary history in their own homes. And so I feel like I have my work cut out for me, and as solid a start as we have in the sense of the reaction from people and how generous they've been to share these correspondences from all these different conflicts, it's just the tip of the iceberg. So, and that's why, again, I can't emphasize enough, even though I may not do another book like War Letters or Behind the Lines, which is an anthology, I'm going to always be writing about these topics. I've also become a columnist for World War II magazine. So every issue, we have a new letter that has not been used before in any of the books or elsewhere. So there are a lot of different ways that we use these letters to get them out to the public.
You bring another idea to mind, and I think because of this remarkable work and the exposure it has, that families who do not even send you letters may sit down with their family, their children, their grandchildren. You're really opening up the roots of that family and its history and appreciation that would not have happened.
Not to overwhelm people with websites, because this is linked onto the warletters.com, but Grace Under Fire, which is really letters of faith in times of war, has its own website. And one of the links on there is how families can use these letters to come together and to learn about their history. But it's a great rainy day activity of going through the letters. And it's interesting because it's, sometimes you might think that the children are like, oh, Mom, I don't want to do this. They're the ones who are pushing it. They want to know more about their grandparents, their uncle or aunt, whoever it was who served. So it really is a wonderful, very wholesome activity for a family to do together.
And many things will happen you'll never know about, but it will happen.
Exactly. I will say one quick thing. If the grandparents are still alive, get their permission before you read through their letters first.
Yes.
We've had some wonderful stories of the grandparents being a little embarrassed by some things that were written, but they were all in good spirit. But it was, it taught me that, just check first. So.
Good note to end on. Ladies and gentlemen, the great news is that this wonderful author, Andrew Carroll, award-winning author, will be back with us again next week. And Before we go off the air, once again, I want to thank the Idaho Humanities Council. They brought our wonderful guests to us and to the people of North Idaho with a banquet this evening. And Virginia Johnson is, as we do this time, getting ready to leave the Humanities Council, but she's the vice chair. And I know you had a lot to do with this, with the entire board. And we're grateful, because without them, you would not be hearing this program or seeing it. And so we want to, again, thank them for bringing such a remarkably prominent author to our community. Again, please be with us next week when we will continue this discussion with author Andrew Carroll. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
Recorded on the campus of North Idaho College, Public Forum is the longest-running in-house college production on PBS. Each episode is pre-recorded live and is an educational outreach from North Idaho College. Please join us at this same time next week for another edition of Public Forum on this public television station. Welcome to Public Forum, a community outreach program produced at North Idaho College on the shores of Lake Coeur d'Alene. Featuring guests from around the globe addressing a wide variety of subjects, Public Forum serves to educate and enlighten. Please join host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart, in welcoming today's guest.
I am so pleased to welcome you back to part 2 of a 2-week series with our very distinguished guest. I welcome back to the program best-selling writer Andrew Carroll, who is the editor of 3 New York Times bestsellers, including the book War Letters, Extraordinary Correspondence from American Wars, that inspired the critically acclaimed PBS documentary War Letters that many of you, I'm sure, saw. Just very impressive work. He's also the author of Grace Under Fire, Letters of Faith in Times of War, 2007, Operation Homecoming, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the Home Front, in the words of U.S. troops and their families, 2006, and Behind the Lines, Powerful and Revealing American and Foreign War Letters, and One Man's Search to Find Them, in 2005. Andrew Carroll, it was a pleasure having you here last week, and we're looking forward to another interview, and congratulations on how successful your works are, and we look forward to reading and hearing from some of the other letters on this show, as well as some other questions. Welcome back.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
And I also want to thank the Idaho Humanities Council. I am just so grateful to them. They're a wonderful, wonderful group, and without them we wouldn't have this program. And they're responsible for our guests, not only on this show, but for a banquet in Coeur d'Alene tonight. And one of our panel members is very much involved in that process. I welcome to the panel Erna Reinhardt, who is Director of Public Relations at North Idaho College, and next to her is Dr. Virginia Tinsley Johnson, who chairs the North Idaho College Division of Communications, Fine Arts, and Humanities. And Virginia, again, thank you. You are Vice Chair of the Council for doing this program, and you and the other members had a lot to do with this, and we thank you very much.
My pleasure indeed.
Yes. And we'll start the question with Erna Reinhardt.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Our last week was wonderful, and I know this week is going to be just as wonderful. You have collected approximately 80,000 letters that represent every conflict that our country has been in. Were there some of the letters that were difficult to read?
Oh, absolutely. Because, especially in the cases where I get to know the family members, there's a woman who, her husband was in Vietnam, and his story is actually featured in the PBS documentary as well. It's a really beautifully written letter. He was a young lieutenant, and he was writing late one night to his wife about the fears he was experiencing, but he couldn't show them to his men. He had to look strong, which is understandable. And it wasn't so much fear, being scared of anything happening to him. It was of losing somebody. And he said that, I don't even want to become friends with some of these guys, not because I don't like them, but because I'm afraid it's going to make it that much harder if anything happens to him. 3 days later, he's the one who died. He stepped on a landmine, and that was it. And so Joyce, who sent me the letter, in fact, it's one of the first letters I opened up when the 80,000 came in back in 1998, has become just the dearest of friends. Anytime she's in South Carolina, if I'm there, I always go see her. And this is true with people all over the country who've contributed letters. They become almost like family to me. I'm very lucky. I think I have 100 adopted grandmothers around the country because I have so many World War II couples that have contributed letters. But that's what makes this project so meaningful to me, is it's the personal connection. We're not a bureaucracy where we sort of just stamp the letters as they come in and put them in an archive. We get to know the people who contribute them, whether they're family members or the veterans themselves.
Excellent.
Virginia Johnson.
Given that you have 80,000 letters, how did you pick the letters for the books? How do you do that?
It's very visceral. I really go, what just sort of tugs at my emotions? What is historic? What is riveting? What's dramatic? I'll give you an easy one, for example. We have a letter, the first lines just grab you. It's, "Dear Sis, it's 9:05 a.m. Sunday morning. The bombs have been dropping for an hour now. There goes another one. I'm trapped here in the forward engine room. I can overhear men screaming on the intercom for their gas masks." You look at the upper right-hand corner. It says December 7th, 1941, USS New Orleans. This young sailor, William Seiko, is inside this ship at Pearl Harbor that's being bombed. Now, we've all seen movie reels or film images, photographs of the USS Arizona and other ships, sinking and on fire at Pearl Harbor. This is what it felt like to be there, and that's what letters give us. It's not just the physical description, the snapshot. It's the emotional snapshot of what it's like to be at the epicenter of history. And we have a young woman who is inside a hotel on 9/11 and right next to the World Trade Center, and she described in a 14-page handwritten letter, moment by moment, of what it was like to be at Ground Zero on 9/11, the horror of it, and which we can't ever forget. And those letters, because they're historic, they're well written, they're intense, are sort of what I call no-brainers. They go in the book. And as I mentioned last week, I like to pick letters that are a little unusual, because I think when people see the title "War Letters" or whatever, know what's in the book, they think, "Oh, I know what these are going to be." Yeah, it's like a guy writing to his mom. He's this or that. I always want to surprise people, and that might be because the letter's funny. It could be because it's by someone famous before they got to be well known. There are all different ways that these letters, I think, can be really special. And what I love is I get reactions from the military buffs who say, "You found things I've never read before." But I also get letters from people who have no interest in history whatsoever, who say, "Now I want to learn more," because these are not about statistics and dates and names and events. Well, it is about names, but it's really about the people, and it's their stories. And it's made me want to learn more about whether it's the D-Day landings or Khe Sanh or Chosin Reservoir or Gettysburg, because through that person, I'm now invested in it, and I want to learn more about the larger story.
As we've already mentioned earlier on the other show, you spoke to young people today in our community, and one thing that I think coming out of that is that they were so fascinated, and a lot of times young people are a little bit challenged to get them to read, but am I not correct that the reason they're so fascinated with your work is it is so personal? It is about family, and it's about relationships. So, a two-part question. Is that correct? And number two, doesn't that encourage young people to become better readers?
Oh, absolutely. And I think I'm very empathetic to this because I grew up with no interest in history. I did a little experiment at the schools today, and last week I told the teachers, you have to close your eyes. I want all the students very quickly to raise your hand if you do not like history. Put it up, put it down. And boy, at one of the schools, it was almost 80% of the students. The second one is more about 50, 60%. And then I told the teachers they could open their eyes if they wanted to, because I think they would have been a little shocked by what they would have seen. But I really understand that.
Yeah.
Because for me, and I want to be a teacher. That's one of the things I want to do, either high school or college level. So I have enormous admiration for anybody who teaches. But I think it's the textbooks we're given are so dry. And it's all about memorizing, these dates and these events. And so that's why I encourage students, pick up Red Badge of Courage or something by Stephen Ambrose or Doris Kearns Goodwin or Michael Beschloss. They're so good at telling stories, or David McCullough, Ken Burns. And these are my heroes, the people who really light that fire, that passion. Yeats has a great line where he says that education is not the filling of a pail, but the lighting of a fire. We're not just sort of dumping information, we're igniting something. And that's what I hope these letters do. And they've certainly done it for me, because now it's all I want to read about and study. But I think it does make them better readers too, because once they start, they realize that there's sort of these concentric circles of interest. That you read about Normandy, well then you got to know, well, how do we get there, and then what happened afterwards? Like, well, okay, after World War II we had the Cold War, and then Vietnam. It inspires people to want to keep learning, and that's the greatest gift in life. And it's the thing I'm so grateful to my parents for, because both with myself, my brother. They encouraged us to read as children, and we just grew up loving books.
That's wonderful. Before we go back to the panel, I just will not let us get too close to the end of the program without more letters. So
Sure.
if you would share some with us now.
I have two that I picked out. One is contemporary, one's an older one. This is, I want to do something from Iraq, and this is by a Lieutenant Colonel named Chris Cohos, who's in the Air Force, and he was writing back to his two boys, who are about 10 and about 7, very young, Kevin and Crew. And it's a very sweet letter, and I love the ending to it, but he says, "Dear boys, I flew a mission yesterday. A squad of Marines was in the mountains, way up above 10,000 feet, and they were attacked by some bad guys. Some of these Marines are only 7 years older than you are, Kevin. All I could think about was you two, hunkering down in the mountains with rockets landing all around you. I have no fear for my own safety, but I'd be petrified if you were in my shoes, or worse yet, theirs. Well, we helped get those guys out of their mess, and none of them got hurt. It felt great to help Americans in trouble, more than great. We did roughly the same thing about 3 days ago, and after that, I sent an email to a Marine major who's a friend of mine, and here's what he wrote back. As you well know, we're a family. We're tight. We don't ask for much. Honor, courage, commitment. It's truly what we live by. And when somebody gives us a hand, we consider it a pretty big honor. You've earned a place in our family, and as a result, I can't even describe what it means to us as a whole. Thanks, brother, for all that you do and for keeping our brothers on the pointy end of the spear out of harm's way." And then he says, "Kevin, I want you to remember this. Babe Ruth struck out 1,330 times. Crew, I think that you and Mark Twain would have been great friends. Here's something he said about boys that makes me think of you. Now and then we had a hope that if we lived and were good, God would permit us to be pirates. Tell Mom you love her. Tell Mom I love her too. Love, Dad."
Incredible.
And again, this is just a simple email home. And Chris wrote a couple others that are a little more, to his family and to friends that are a little more philosophical, and what it's like to be in Mesopotamia, which, of course, the biblical history of that area is extraordinary. Mm-hmm. But it's, again, to show that sense of pride, and that we don't hear a lot of, but it's very much there. And when I went to Iraq and Afghanistan, it was my favorite part of the trip, was just seeing how much these troops believed in their country, in each other, and how much they were there to support each other.
That's great. And if we could have one more letter.
Sure, real quickly. So this one, I'm not going to tell you who wrote this first. I want to read it. And it's a much longer letter, but this is just an excerpt. In, I think it was February of 1945, British and American warplanes firebombed Dresden. By sheer coincidence, a group of American POWs were there, and they survived the firebombing because they were put, as soon as the air raid sirens went off, they were huddled down to a slaughterhouse underground, which protected them. So they survived the firebombing. So this young private from Indianapolis wrote home to his father, this is just a very short part of it, under the Geneva Convention, officers and non-commissioned officers are not obliged to work when taken prisoner. Well, I am, as you know, a private. So 150 such minor beings like myself were shipped to Dresden on January 10th. I was their leader by the virtue of the little German I spoke. It was our misfortune to have sadistic and fanatical guards. We were refused medical attention and clothing. We were given long hours of extremely hard labor. Our food ration was 250 grams, which is minuscule, black bread and unseasoned potato soup each day. After desperately trying to improve our situation for 2 months and having been met with bland smiles, I told the German guards just what I was going to do to them when the Russians showed up. Well, they beat me up a little bit for that, and I was fired as group leader. He goes on to describe how he survived Dresden and eventually was liberated. That was, I think, a 22-year-old Kurt Vonnegut. This letter was lost for, I think, 50 years. And we were able to find it in an archive. It had been misfiled. And it's the whole letter is just incredible because it recounts this whole story in World War II and being liberated. But it's just one more example of what's out there. And, tucked away in these archives and libraries and people's attics and basements is our history. And I think we need to do everything we can to preserve it as a way of honoring those who served, to say these are their stories, their voices. And nobody can tell it better than they can.
It just really opens up. We have a lot of famous authors and writers, and like yourself and others, but our country's full of literary people that, in their own personal way, with their family, are able to express themselves. It should make Dr. Johnson happy, and from the English department and her background. It's just really, really rewarding. With that, we'll go back to Erna Reinhardt.
2 quick questions, Andrew. clarify for our viewers, not all the letters are from servicemen. So what other kinds of people
I'm so
are?
glad you mentioned that, because we absolutely want to include the home front in this. They too endure so much, whether they're the spouses or the parents, the children. They too go to war in a sense when their loved ones go off to fight. And so we have a whole chapter, and actually all the books, on the home front and what they're writing. We don't have as many of those letters because, especially in past wars, the home front is obviously writing to the front lines, and it's harder for the troops to save those letters. They just get lost over time, whereas the troops are writing home where they're held on to. But now with email, it's actually a little bit better because we've got both sides going back and forth. And so that's very much a part of the project as well.
And the second question, a complete aside, I think, to this entire project is something unique that you're doing and trying to rally support for the troops themselves. So tell us real quickly about that.
Well, I use this whole project because I've, as someone who came from a background with no military experience, no one in my family has ever served, I was really just ignorant of what the military families go through and how much they sacrifice and how much they do for this country. So a big part of this project is just to try to bring awareness of how we can all do more to support our troops, whether it's sending phone cards overseas or care packages or writing letters or here on the home front rallying churches and synagogues to support a local military base. All this is on our website, warletters.com, specific things that men and women can do, everybody can do across this country. And I really think, regardless of what someone thinks about these conflicts in Iraq or Afghanistan, we can all agree that we have to support these men and women more. And it can't just be talk, it has to be in action too.
Excellent, thanks.
Virginia Johnson.
Last week, Andy, you mentioned that humor is the way that these people in the military often had to cope. Could you just talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, people are surprised by how much humor is in these books. And there's a whole chapter in Behind the Lines, and it's called Laughing Through the Tears. And it's how they use a little bit of levity to get through very tough times. And that we have this in this book as well, in Operation Homecoming. I know I just have a very short thing. Do I have time to read?
Okay. Oh, sure.
This is I want to make sure we get some attention to the female troops because they're performing admirably overseas. And this is a young woman named Sharon Allen who wrote this very funny little thing on an interaction she had with these Kurdish troops. And the Kurds love us.